That's it. Cool. All right. Excellent stuff. Well, welcome everybody, and thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening on the webinar. We've got a 90 minutes where we're going to be talking a little bit about data, storytelling, and a little bit about how that could be the cornerstone of your brand and how you actually build that out. It's our fourth webinar in 2024. So it's one that we plan to deliver, or we plan to deliver one of these every month. The idea covering different facets of business, but also looking at some of the if you like, the expectations, the environments that we're working in. And I think there's some interesting stuff. So we did an environmental scan in January. We'll probably follow up one shortly over the next couple of months when we do that. Okay. And yeah, and so if you've got a suggested topic, if you want something in that particular line, please do sort of come in, do join us along that page. We'll be more than happy to address any particular aspect of business and bring in speakers and guest speakers, very much like Matt, very much like the people around us and within the community that we can support, and we can develop that aspect of our work. So this is the team from the Weave. Just to introduce a few people in there. There's Adam Roxbury, who is our communications director. There's myself. There's Magdalena, who's the chief facilitator. There's Vicky, who's doing a lot more on our social media marketing side of things. And there's Sandrine as well, that we're talking to at the moment about community wellbeing. She's delivering a very sort of impactful piece around sophrology. And that's an area of where we want to really sort of kind of explore the value of the community and helping people connect and feel kind of more grounded in what they do and more focused around what they do. I think one of the statistics that's quite frightening was that 49% of all founders this year are thinking about throwing in the towel simply because they are in burnout stage. And I think that's a big part of what we're trying to alleviate within this world, is what we can do to create capacity, grow connections, create those opportunities for collaboration, and that ultimately allows breathing room and space for people to actually start to focus in and develop their business. So that's the team as it is. You know, I had a meeting this afternoon with somebody else that said they're very interested in getting more involved. So all in all, it's quite interesting and quite, you know, sort of a good space to be. We've just coming off the back of an iTeams program, which was a really sort of successful open innovation event. And that seems to have, again, found favour and connected with the community and grown that as well. So over the next 90 minutes, this is what we're going to be looking at. We're going to be thinking very much around this world of vision, where we address a particular problem, we see a particular solution. We're going to try and equip you with some relevant sort of skills around storytelling, particularly when we think about brands as well, and brand storytelling and the nature of the tone of voice of our business and what that actually tells us. And also thinking about data, not just simply how we collect and gather, which is a huge, big, important part of what we're talking about, but also the importance of data in driving change, in driving innovation, in driving different aspects of our business. And there are many different ways that we can engage with that. So I think that's a really important part of the area. And Matt will hopefully be giving us some insights around the real world and some stuff that he's been involved with within his own business, and talk a little bit more about that kind of area as well. Cool. So this is me. I often describe myself as a 62-year-old entrepreneur with a 10-year plan. Primarily, you know, I don't see myself really ever giving up in the world of startups and the world of businesses. Spend a lot of time working with the next generation, the students, which, if anything, ultimately keeps you incredibly focused on what's coming up behind and what's the new marketplaces are going to be looking like, what people are really going to be interested in going forward. And it's a great space to really connect and engage with. So when we work down at the university, whether we're delivering particular events like the iTeams program, like Weekenders and various things. I also do a lot of mentoring with those students, and it's a really sort of great space to be doing that. I'm going to hand over just very briefly, just at this particular point, to Matt, just to introduce himself, just as a brief overview about his background and what his business is all about. So Matt, if you want to unmute yourself.
Well, thanks, James. Hi, everyone. I'm Matt. I started Priestley in 2020, right in the thick of COVID. So it's been an interesting time to start a business. We're a digital marketing agency offering a range of services, everything from data research and insights through to creative content, paid media, and a whole mix of other things as well. Primarily, a lot of the work we do is with B2B companies, but we do also do some work on the consumer side as well. I'm going to talk a bit today about a few sources that we use often with clients to find data, some of the creative ways you can use that data as part of your storytelling, and a few tips and recommendations that I hope will be helpful.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. And we will hear from you a bit later on. But thank you very much, Matt. Right. Okay. This is an kind of important part of our kind of thinking and theorizing around businesses and business development. One of the things that I'm really sort of kind of very passionate about is this idea of thinking about business holistically, is not thinking about it in terms of the silos and the compartmentalization that we often experience when we think about business development. And I think that the key sort of understanding behind all of this is that if we think of the business as a system, then the system has a story, it has a narrative. And these are the elements that a system comprises. It has a clear objective, a clear set of outcomes that it's trying to achieve. And this goes beyond that kind of process of making money, of driving revenues, all vital aspects of being in business, all crucial to how we've built the resources to deliver things and to make things work. But actually, the purpose of the business goes beyond that element, that area of development. And I think I listened to one Simon Sinek, and I mean, we're all great lovers of Simon Sinek in our business anyway, when he talks about various different things. And he related it very much to this idea of, money being petrol we put into a car. The purpose of a business is not to buy petrol. The purpose of the business is to go somewhere. And that, at the end of the day, is what we're all about when we think about purpose. Where are we heading? What are we going into? Where are we going to do? What's the impact of what we're actually trying to create? And also within a system, there are elements. There are those components, those interconnected aspects of a business. And we use a thing called the business model canvas, lean canvases, lots of different canvases, but the original canvas, the business model canvas, which was very much about identifying those elements, building and thinking about those interconnections. And it's those interactions that then spark the way the business works. And what we found and what we believe is that very much when people talk about their business, when they pick up a particular narrative based within their business, what happens is they reimagine those interactions. And each time they reimagine those interactions, they refine them, they redefine them, they reconnect to the original purpose, and they constantly evaluate their effectiveness when it comes to the elements and the way that the business is being designed and put together. So this as a system is a really important part. And then a system in itself has a really interesting embedded story. And this is, again, a bit about what we're trying to achieve today, is extracting that element of that story, that narrative, that can really make a real difference and drive growth into your business. If during the course of the presentation you decide you want to kind of comment or have a chat, then please just do so within the chat facility, or raise your hand, or just simply go unmute and say, James, you're talking a load of nonsense. This is what we really all think. But at the end of the day, just engage if you really want to. This is what we're trying to establish. It's a very open space. It's an open forum. These are only our perspectives. So this is a kind of area, storytelling and why it matters. And I think that, the narrative and the stories that we tell make us really, really human. They make us connected. And we've been doing it ever since we're in the caves, going back many, many generations and billions of years. We've been telling those stories. We've been painting them, visualizing them. We've been putting them into a framework that really does concentrate the mind and transfer that data about what is going on and why it really does kind of lead to something and why it matters. And I think we can familiarize ourselves in that regard when we can kind of look at stories around the youth and where we've come from within our business. A lot of businesses struggle with this idea of connecting the legacy of the business and the way that the business is being developed into the current and existing narrative. A business doesn't necessarily have to do what it has done in the past. It will always be in an involved state of mind. But it has a basis of communication. It has a story. It has a trajectory that it's come from. And I think that that's something at the end of the day, which is a really profound part of it. So we all love that kind of story of the little boy or little girl selling lemonade at the bottom of the drive, and we're talking, to our customers on a hot sunny day and everything along those lines. This is all part of the foundation of those individual narratives, those stories. We look for those moments that create that interaction and really do elevate the narrative and the story of our business into something which is emotional and which is connected to our customers. And it's really important that we understand that, because our customers don't necessarily want to know why or how much things work, or how they work necessarily effectively within the business. They just want to see what the business does for them, how it can transition them, how it can move them forward, how it can overcome those particular challenges. So it's important to understand that we don't let go of the past, but we understand its importance to the future and the way that we want to create and develop some aspect of our business. So again, when we think about, we talked about the business as systems with the purpose, the elements. The other thing that makes a business very systemic, its way and its piece of the way that it comes together, is it looks at the interconnections that it creates beyond the boundaries of what it's doing itself within the business. The forces of change that impose itself on the business from the environment, the political, the economic, the social, the technological, ecological, the impacts, the things at the end of the day that are driving the narrative within the business and making things, modifying change for our customers. And this is a really important part of that particular process, because we have to stop and look beyond what we do internally to actually understand where we need to be going and the forces of change that are driving us in that particular direction. So that mindset of looking beyond the environment is a really systemic part of that process, to understand that those forces of change are actually shaping the direction of the business, and we as owners and as entrepreneurs are modifying and managing that particular change. And that's again something which narrative is a really profound part of uncovering. The more stories we tell about the things that are going on, the more value that we extract within that process, and the more opportunities that we can face and uncover as we sort of move forward. So a particular kind of systemic story in its own right is one that leans into each of those relevant components. It talks about the interconnectedness, the elements within that of a complex system. And what makes our lives complex is nothing more than, it's not about technologies or anything like that. What brings complexity are customers, are humans, are people, because every single person, as much as we want to generalize and be generic about what they are, every single person that connects and engages with our business does so in a unique and profoundly human way. And actually, when we start to, again, encompass those particular narratives and stories around the business, then what we end up with is we start to engage with what's the driving forces, the loops, the shapes, the kind of, if you like, the flywheels that can actually operate in our business and allow us that opportunity to grow. So all of that kind of talking around that drives that purposeful outcome, that change that we're really sort of interested in achieving. And again, the narrative and the stories really do sit and overlay the whole kind of process. But there is a real structure to stories. It doesn't matter, where they really ultimately come from. There's a real structure to them. They have this kind of concept of a character, and that character is often, and it has to be from our perspective, our customers. So a character is a customer at the end of the day, and that customer has a problem, and that problem then meets a guide, and you in the business act as that particular guide, and they and you give them a plan that basically leads them to do something, and ultimately from that perspective either avoids failure or ends in success. That's the traditional structure of a story. That's the way that it's been written out since the days of Plato and Aristotle and all the rest of it. That's, at the end of the day, the narrative that we embed within our business. We all know and think of it in terms of, if you think of it in terms of Jaws, where you've got Chief Brody, who's got a big problem, which is a big fish and a big shark, meets a guide who happens to be Hooper, played by Richard Dreyfuss, and the guy Quig or wherever he was, or Quint, who played by Robert Shaw. Those guides took them out into a particular area, presented a plan where they were there destined to do what they were going to do with the fish, call them to action, get them in a boat, and part of it ends in failure, part of it ends in success. So the narrative and the story that we create around our businesses are those which we feel very familiar with, and ultimately that our customers can position themselves in as the characters, as the hero, if you like, within the particular story. And it doesn't matter, we've got other stories within the world of Coca-Cola. Father Christmas on the back of the lorry is the character, has a problem, can't sell enough Coca-Cola to a village. The whole kind of process goes through that whole area and ends up in success because the whole community raises a glass of Coca-Cola and it's wonderful. But that's all about marketing. That's all about that brand development. But it's not essentially anything new. It's just the way that we can start to reimagine and reconnect with the way that our business narrative unfolds. So what we'd say for that particular process, again, within that, there are certain rules, certain guidelines that we try to adhere to when we start thinking about structure of our stories and the way that they develop. One such author wrote those particular structures down. I'm not going to go through each and every single one of them, but I don't know if anybody's ever read any Kurt Vonnegut. He's an amazing writer, wrote Cat's Cradle and Breakfast of Champions and all those other books out there. But he's a really, really powerful writer. But he gave this 8 rules of writing. And it's really interesting because initially, this is the way that a lot of people, when they go into a creative writing environment, actually start to engage with the development of the story, the development of the narrative. So what we look for are those foundational areas, and that's like kind of those guidelines that we can lean into that can help us elevate the interactions within the business. There are two key things, one of which is the customer as our hero, right, within the story, and ourselves as the guide. We're not the hero. The product that we're creating is not the hero of the piece either. That's the other aspect of what we sometimes get wrong. We position ourselves at the forefront of the narrative, when in reality, that's not what we're about. At the back end of this, the customer is the person who really will engage and really feel that much more connected to our business in that particular process. So all I'd say is that, if you get the slides, and they'll be loaded up in the community, so you'll be able to get those and ultimately get to that particular area. Got the recording pause, isn't it? While the recording, it's recording, isn't it? Well, maybe it wasn't recording. Anyway, I'll do that again. Okay, so there's a difference between communication versus storytelling. Communication we tend to think of as being quite logical, and it's again a really important part of this process. We communicate clearly, logically, with clarity, but sometimes when we communicate in the traditional ways that we do that, it can be quite cold. It can be quite generic in its particular its process. There is something about clarity that comes from communication, which is really important in terms of making sure people understand what's expected of them, setting those guidelines and those parameters. But stories have the role of interpretation. They have imagery embedded within them. They have a powerful kind of vision aspect of what they're about. And from that perspective, they allow people to reposition themselves in a different area to the business. So communication is often either top down, outward, impacting that kind of area of development in that regard, versus storytelling, which is more about imagination, that visualization, and ultimately passing information to someone in a particular way that allows them to interpret and put their own interpretation into that space. There comes a risk with doing that because quite clearly people read or engage with stories and they bring their own imagination interpretation to it. But at the same time, what we have to do is we have to trust the customer to be able to understand the basis of that narrative. We have to allow the customer to interpret something that they feel is right for them. So to understand that difference between communication versus storytelling is to understand the value of both elements, but also to understand where that storytelling can fit into the construction of your business. There is no point just simply communicating a series of numbers to your customers, to your community, to your stakeholders, without actually giving them some way or some meaning going forward. This is a book which is a really useful resource and one that I think is quite powerful when we come to doing this, which is Building a Story Brand by a guy called Donald Miller. There's a whole kind of background to that, which ultimately is all around a lot of that shaping of the narrative and the shaping of the stories. But Donald Miller in himself is somebody that has got his own coaching company, his own sort of kind of marketing agency out of States and all the rest of it. But he does make that kind of connection, and a lot of what we talk about here today features and feels very much like that kind of process as well. And it's just an important part from our perspective that, clarity, we want clarity in our business. We want to be able to articulate who we are, what we're about, but we also want resonance. We want that ability for our customers to really feel connected to the brand, connected to the way that we're actually delivering something. And when we talk to people in an emotional language and that creates that resonance, then what it does do within that particular phrase is or that particular state is bring those hooks closer to the business. It allows us to build more of a sticky value proposition for them, something at the end of the day that they feel more aligned to, something that they actually want to be a part of. The thing about it is, at the end of it all, is that it's actually quite a slow burn in terms of building this particular area. It's something that we can't necessarily embed, but what we imprint into people's minds really quickly. But what we actually need to be able to do is, like I said, is go back to that idea of appreciating where we've come from and how we've arrived at this particular junction. So storytelling and building a vision is, again, a huge important part of this particular process. A lot of businesses don't necessarily engage with a concept of direction of where they're going, the impact they want to create beyond the space that they're working. And I think that's one of those pieces of clarity that needs to come through within it. We don't want to just simply be building something that in truth doesn't necessarily get us anywhere within the next 5 years or whatever. We want something which there is a North Star, a place where we can actually make things happen and can really start to enliven that conversation. The other thing about talking and narrating stuff when it comes to a vision is that it's actually an incredibly powerful way of driving connection within the business. People do not want to necessarily connect to a business where vision doesn't exist. They want to connect to a business where vision and impact actually do manifestly present themselves. And this is something which, of course, the power of the story and the narrative really does. There is always this kind of tension between where we are, the limitations and anchors in our mind, versus the direction and future travel of where we want to be. And if you imagine that elastic band around our waist being pulled in one direction, that creative tension of moving ourselves forward, that pull and push of those two areas, what we have to do is use the narrative and the conversations that we can create to shift that current reality closer to where we really want it to be. And that's, again, part of the dialogue that we want to build in our business. The thing at the end of the day that we're really, really impassioned about that actually can then manifestly come out and start talking to people in a powerful and communicating way. So this kind of creative tension is something that we work with, and we don't necessarily work against it. We actually welcome that kind of pull and push of it, because it ultimately helps us figure out the journey for the customer and the journey for ourselves, and where that fits into that overall narrative within the business. So as I said before, when we were going back to that idea of talking about stuff around the elements of a business and actually bringing in that kind of neurological pathway of reconnecting the business and what we're talking about and reimagining it each time we speak about our business, this is a constant process within the business, and it really does open up those particular pathways. So if you imagine, remember when Apple presented itself to the world first off with the iPad, or the phone rather, and he kind of came out with this kind of concept of presenting an existing reality, a current space that was beyond what people had imagined before, and painted that direction of connectivity into the future. And Steve Jobs, was one of these people that could use narrative and stories in a really impactful, powerful way to drive his business forward. So the world is full of information, and that's part of the whole kind of process around this as well. So we're awash with information. We've got books, we've got websites, news outlets, we've got bits of work like this where we're imparting information, we're sharing knowledge around those particular areas. And I think there is, information alone can confuse, it can hide things and mislead the listeners. And there's a book that I read at the beginning of the year by a guy called Ross Atkins. And Ross Atkins, if you ever come across him, is a guy on the BBC that often is brought in to explain relatively complicated things in a really clear and manageable way. And the book, which is called The Art of Explanation, is a real sort of kind of way of addressing that process of making people aware of what information is all about. And the quote that I kind of picked up from this was that he says that in history teaches us narrative can be used for the worst and the best of reasons. And what is beyond doubt is the potency of stories. And that again comes into this particular area. We can use our language to provide information or misinformation. We can set out to create clarity, and we can set out to confuse. But what we need to be able to understand is why we need to be doing either of those. So what's beyond doubt is that potency of the stories. He also goes on to say that it's a brand that shapes the narrative, as this can be an incredibly powerful tool in bringing people towards you and keeping them there. So again, that whole kind of idea of emitting signals that resonate with our audience, that are in a narrative format, that ultimately allow our customers, our community, our stakeholders to see themselves within the business. So if you want to create those emotional connections and tell a story, it's just about that kind of understanding of why you started, why you've got, why you get out of bed every day and in the morning, and why the customer should ultimately care. And that really, at the end of the day, is they want to see themselves in some shape or form benefiting their transformation. It doesn't matter whether we're selling them a piece of office furniture, or whether we're selling them clean windows or a whole new rebrand on that particular business. The whole point about it is that they need to see that piece of transformation and that way of delivering it in some shape or form. So information, the clarity of it, the communicating, these are things which we can really invest our time and energy in understanding. And ultimately, from that perspective, it starts with this kind of process, seeing that kind of holistic big picture about what it is that we're trying to achieve. And this is a great category, and it's one that we use quite a lot when we come to think of it. And it's based around, I think it's some form, I think it's a fable which was all there to make people understand that if you just see one aspect of a particular thing that's in front of us, then what we end up doing is misinterpreting that one aspect. And often when we again deal with communicating in silos, we don't consider the implications of what that one piece of information is actually imparting about the overall bigger picture. So the kind of thing that allows us then to engage, if you like, in business, moving from the kind of passive observers of that particular business into change agents, into ways that we can make the business work. So if we change and modify our customer segments, then we ultimately modify our value propositions. And if we change our value proposition, the chances are that we may start to think about new revenue streams that we can embed in the business. Everything changes. We push on one lever, things change. So that's the part of a narrative in actually unearthing a lot of that misinformation, that siloed looking at what we're doing within the business. And it's important as well because businesses have a capacity to do stuff. And when we are out of line with what we're capable of delivering versus what our expectations and aspirations are to deliver, and that misalignment between resources, capacity, activity is at the end of the day something that can really sort of either chew up capital and destroy the business very quickly, or alternatively just decline the customer experience, and at the point we lose whatever kind of leverage we've had with our customers. So this is again thinking about what we do within the business. How does that actually then create some aspect of causality, some aspect of outcome that we really want to be invested in? So that's why we use tools like the business model canvas, not because they create silos of thinking, but because we can identify where the changes in dynamics within the business become important parts of the outcomes and the purpose that's actually being driven by the business. So it kind of just allows us to kind of move away from the immediate into the bigger picture. What happens when we go down that particular line? So the thing also about all of this is that it's all about growth. It's all about presenting ourselves into a space where we can innovate, test, develop, learn new ideas, and we can bring them into our business, and we can start to modify the way that we potentially deliver the business. We're all really good at certain parts of what we do, but sometimes we get lost in the melee of it all, and we end up not being able to grow, not being able to actually deliver what we really wanted to deliver. So a narrative has that ultimately the ability to be able to help us achieve that kind of sustainable growth. So growth, it often infatuates us, and we often judge success in our businesses through kind of visible metrics like revenues or margins, profits, things along those lines. But it's really important that that we identify movement and dynamics, and this is again where stories and narratives and data really feature. Everything changes, every interaction that we create, like we said, creates complexity, but it also creates ripples. It creates that ability. It's a pebble within the pond. And what we want to do is we want to start talking about where the ripples are going, what we're actually thinking through within our business. So according to Gary Pisano, who's a HBR professor, and he wrote a particular article on how fast should your company really grow. He suggests that that growth is an elusive property for many people, and of their research, there are many businesses over the last 40 years. Only a very small number of them actually have managed to achieve what they define as being sustainable growth. And part of that, the ones that have managed to achieve it have actually had the strongest of narratives within the business, the ability to be able to tell those particular stories and actually deliver those particular outcomes. And the remaining sort of kind of 3/4 of the businesses that haven't managed to grow, their work identified those elements going from episodic success, i.e. small bursts of success, through to that idea of continual growth and development. It's really interesting if you're watching the markets this day and age that we've had a real robust rally in US equities. UK markets have remained pretty stagnant in terms of what they're doing. But if you look at it, there have been maybe 3 or 4 stocks in the US that have actually driven the entire indices higher. One of those is the NVIDIA stock, which is all about AI and tech and all about chips and various things along those lines. And then, the rest of the other stuff has really been stagnant. And I think that what we've got to remember is that it's that language that starts to open up those conversations about what's going on in the wider world that leads people into the space of innovation, of opportunity, and of opportunity seeking. And I think that we're in that particular area where we're running the gauntlet between opportunity seeking and the resource capabilities of the business, that kind of keeping the alignment to what we're about. So we want to grow, but we want to grow sustainably. We want to attract resources to grow. So we need a strong narrative that brings those resources to us. We have to put that in. We have to put that element. It's fertilizing the ground in order to create that level of growth and developing it. So a powerful narrative has that kind of area, puts customers front, center, and back of what we're doing. You can think of businesses like Patagonia. You can think of businesses like IKEA to a degree, they've all started to really engage with powerful storytelling and really putting the customer and the customer journey front and back. Just because they're big businesses doesn't mean to say that it's their prerogative. It's all about, from our perspective, being able to do that within our own business and build that depth of narrative and that strength within that process. So we've mentioned it before, and this is one of the things that we often talk about within this, the business model canvas, which is a 9 building blocks of a business. We use it for multiple different ways of business development, but there's a good blog out there. There are 14 different ways of using the canvas. There's probably a lot more, to be perfectly honest. We use it again for technologies. We look at a business from a technology perspective and identify where technologies exist within the canvas. But ultimately, the canvas creates a common narrative, a common language that people can use within the business. So when we're working with teams, working with founders, founding teams, or whatever, it creates that unifying language within what they're doing. But it's also a really great space where we can build the story of a business. We can talk about the customers, the customer segments that we're really engaged in with. We can talk about what kind of relationships we want with those customers and where we're going to find them, how we're going to connect to them, what kind of content do we want to put into that particular space, what kind of resonance does that create for them, and the value proposition, the job that we're trying to do for our customers, and the pain and the gains that we take away from them. These are really powerful parts of the narrative. These are the things that we've been speaking about before. So it's really important to understand that. And again, from that perspective, what we've got and what we need in terms of resources. And most importantly, or really importantly for a lot of us in business, who can we work with in partnership? Who can we actually collaborate with to actually give ourselves that opportunity of turning what we want to deliver into a bigger prospect of delivering it to more? And that's always a challenge, but it's always a question. Who do we really want to partner with to actually make that piece of difference happen? And I think that's, again, one of the questions that originate when we start to work with the canvas and start to make things like that happen. So the other part of storytelling, and something that, again, that we're very focused upon, is that kind of idea of brand development and storytelling within the brand. I think there are 4 key areas of the brand in today's modern world, one of which is purpose, being really clear on what that kind of core purpose is within the business, the impact that the business really wants to make. I had a conversation the other day with a business or a student business, and he was talking about changing or wanting to modify the relationship that young people have with finance. And he wanted to create a process where he could educate people, young people, in a language that they understood about money, about investment, about finance, about planning for the future. And we spoke about that as a kind of a core purpose. And we also, as we were talking, it became more and more clear that finance wasn't really the thing that he was actually really interested in. It was people living a more liberated, less burdened lifestyle, giving people that opportunity to be better decision makers without absorbing debt, without going in that particular direction. And I think that when we started to unearth all of that kind of area, there was a different story that he was willing to look at and contemplate. So with us, it may well appear a very clear idea about the kind of impact and change that we want to be associated with. But actually, when we start telling the stories and we start repeating the stories and we start digging deeper into the stories, the why of the behind everything that we're doing, we can unearth new areas, new developments, and new parts of the storytelling that really open up different opportunities within that particular space. So within this particular brand, he's shifted his kind of model a little bit now to be very much about incorporating education in finance, but also thinking about the freelance lifestyles, thinking about working independently, thinking about rental markets as opposed to ownership, thinking about shared occupancy rather than outright ownership in property, all of these different areas that he could start to then think about, because he started to think about his business not being about educating people in finance, but actually living a much more liberated, less burdened lifestyle. So it's again part of that particular process. But why does it matter in terms of brands? Well, it really does matter, because if you think about that, the value of that stock market, the value of those organizations, right? That around, so much of it is around that brand equity state. The valuation of a business, the balance sheet of a business when it comes to what its assets are, the intangible assets around brand equity account for so much more than the actual absolute financial assets. So we have to understand from that perspective, and I apologize to Mick, or thank you very much to Mick. I nicked one of his slides from one of his presentations, but ultimately, from that point of view, that's the bit that really matters within the development of our business, that overriding area of how do we are perceived, what we can deliver within that. So for me, brands consist of purpose, but they also consist of community. How do we actually grow our communities? How do we figure out where we're relevant within that particular audience? Our customers reside often in our communities, but they're not just full of customers, they're also full of other stakeholders, investors, they're full of our partners, employees, they're full of people who are interested in what we're doing. These are the communities that we want to communicate with in order that we can actually start to grow that resonance, and that connection between everybody. And then the third part of that is the technologies that we use within our business that create far better customer experiences, but also give us room and efficiency within the business where we can do more of the good stuff. So every time we engage with technologies, what we do is we open up pathways for efficiency, which ultimately means that we can create greater space to do more good work with our particular customers. And it's something really important in that line that we're kind of like focused upon when it comes down to that. One tool that we've got that's quite good in that regard is this concept of archetypal branding. So the brand archetype framework was kind of introduced by a psychologist called Carl Jung, who's best known for his work in sort of analytical psychology. And Jung proposed this particular kind of concept around archetypes, universal symbolic patterns and themes of behavior that are associated with each individual human as they go through. It's an exploring sort of kind of archetypes that he used. He didn't use them explicitly in the world of branding, but it's just something that the world of branding and the areas of human connection has created within that particular space. So the brand archetype framework draws upon that kind of Jung's concepts within this. It's communicate the essence of a brand, its personality, its values, its purpose. And there are kind of there are lots of different sort of outcomes of each that, and each you associate with different areas, if you like, different goals, different themes that you can tap into. So, like I said, he did not specifically relate this theory to branding. His insights, particularly in the world of human psyche, have kind of inspired marketers and people to actually start to reconnect that idea of the brand archetype and what it really creates and what it really means. So here is the thing, you can look it up online. There's a load of resources around it. There's a load of different work being done with it. We like it because it's, to a degree, it's maybe a bit formulaic in a lot of stuff, but the beauty of the framework is that it is founded in that human psychology, and it does break things down into that particular space. It's about identification, what you identify with within that, but also primarily what your customer is identifying themselves within that particular area. That's the most important part, really, from that perspective. So we may see ourselves as more than one archetype, but the problem with that is that when we do, it becomes a little bit blurry. The idea is that what we really want to be able to do is identify quite profoundly with a particular archetype and drill into the relevant areas that we want to explore within that and within that particular narrative. So starting out on that kind of wheel, you've got the first part of it, which is the innocent brands, and the innocent brands tend to be pure, optimistic, simple. They evoke safety, nostalgia, and these brands and tales within these brands are kind of those stories of authenticity, happier times in the past, that kind of looking at things through maybe a slightly more kind of rose-tinted perspective. So they kind of hanker back to that age where life maybe was simpler and a little bit easier for people to get to. And it's kind of people's expectations. That's what they want to be associated with within that. You've got the sage, and the sage archetype is characterized by that kind of idea of wisdom, knowledge transference, pursuit of truth. There's another big aspect within that. And brands often would tell stories around that particular process, a journey of learning, discovery, the joy of finding out the truth, appealing to those with knowledge and insight. So again, that kind of area. There are wisdom stories that you can talk about, sage people that, anybody from, kind of Yoda right the way down to, Lord of the Rings kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, it's that kind of sense of knowledge and of learning environments that people get to. The Explorer speaks for itself pretty much. The band is a bit more adventurous, it's a bit more out there, but it's putting themselves, the customer, into that world of outside of their comfort zone, another space where they can perhaps learn. So there's a strong sense of individualism, not going the collective way, going very much more into that kind of breaking into the free of conventions model. The hero brands are everywhere. There are lots of them out there. The stories typically involve about overcoming big challenges in some shape or form. Very much within the narrative, positioning people within that sense of there is that big sort of hurdle, and it's about overcoming that challenge, demonstrating the strength, the bravery, various things. A lot of kind of, I mean, there are lots of car brands that position themselves in that particular space, but there are lots of other brands that you would kind of imagine in that area that really do sort of kind of pick up on that kind of that ego aspect of it. The magician brands that promise kind of magical transformation, shifting over from something which their stories often involve that kind of change, that journey of change where something is transformed or transformational, from mundane into the extraordinary, seeking sort of kind of a sense of wonder and empowerment. The rebel brands, they tend to be those ones that stand against something or tend to go into the world of shock as well. I think Benetton, going back over the years, was probably a real rebel brand in that regard. It did certainly invoke a lot of shock in some of the adverts and things that it was doing within that place. Again, I think probably Body Shop in its original form was very much like that. So there's a story about rebellion, revolution, sort of things for desire for change, slightly more sort of underhand in that regard. But ultimately, there are sort of kind of clear values that are associated to that. Citizen brands, they kind of more authentic, down to earth, sense of being a part of a society, of overcoming struggle collectively. So they do favour the kind of the idea of dependability, of hard work, of that kind of area as well. So again, those sorts of brands sort of appeal to, when you think about some of the maybe the NGOs or the charities, maybe these brands relate very much more into that. Jesters, the humorous ones, jester brands bringing joy, fun into our world. Humor is a funny thing. It breaks down many walls within any form of brand, but we have to understand that humor is a chosen taste for certain people. We often show when we do this kind of work with our kind of student businesses, we often show a mixture of different adverts, and we always relate them back to of their day. So we might show something like an Old Spice advert going back to the 1970s, and then we'd show another one in modern day, and how they modified their overall messaging, their overall area. But the Jester brand, at the end of the day, they're humorous, but they are kind of brands which do, they have that kind of clever twist about them as well. The lover brands, these are brands which kind of feature on romance, beauty, fiction, aiming to create stories around emotional bonds with their audience. So things at the end of the day that lean into that. Moving on, the ruler brand is that kind of strong leadership brand, appealing to those who aspire to the powerful and successful. Those things, they like being in control. They like dictating. They like sort of putting it into that particular space where they can help businesses or customers really sort of take control of what they are, but they are in themselves in the controlling area. The caregiver, these brands kind of go into the nurturing environments. And I always think community brands, not dissimilar to the Weave, go into that caregiver space. because they're there for a purpose. They're there about trying to be generous, trying to be caring for others as a central theme, one that resonates with a lot of people in that particular world. And finally, sort of moving on to the creator brand. These are the kind of the more creative, expressional bands. They appeal to self-expression. They appeal to those with creativity and originality. That's the wheel. That's the kind of overview of what it does. If you want to know more about it, then by all means look on it. But each of those relevant stories fits within the way that we want to build and promote the business and talk about the business in the outside world. Actually, when we find a brand or a particular archetype that we can relate to, it does empower the kind of whole kind of creative process around that. So why it matters again from that perspective, we're always thinking about the fact that companies connect at a human level with people through their emotions. The payoff of of doing that can be absolutely huge, because at the end of it all, it breeds loyalty. So when you look at, I think there was an example of a major credit card company. I can't remember which one it was, but it was appealed directly towards the millennials. And I think by just literally creating a more humane narrative around that, what they ended up doing was increasing sales by around 70%, and retention levels went through the roof. So it has a powerful, and it can have a really powerful effect if you get that messaging and that narrative and that story within the business absolutely right. And I think that, again, there are plenty of examples out there where people have miscued it as well as got it completely right. And I always think, again, when we're talking about this in terms of innovation and area, people are more tolerant of a brand that's looking to do something different if they really do believe the story of the brand, if they really do believe the authenticity that lies behind that brand. They're more tolerant of mistakes. They're more willing and giving to allow the brand room to test out new ideas, if at the end of the day that's coming from an authentic and clear sort of kind of background and a way of doing it. But again, it's challenging for a lot of people to actually start to do this, because for a lot of us, we live in a world of communication, not storytelling. And when we're in that world of communication, things are very easy. We pick up on logic and we present it in a particular way. But actually, when it falls on deaf ears, we wonder why. And often it could be just simply that. Again, starting to talk about our friend Mr. Cynic, when we talk about this and that kind of idea of what people buy at the end of the day and why you do it. So that kind of level of tolerance can allow us to be more innovative. It can allow us to be more adventurous about the kind of work that we do, and it can be really impactful in that particular regard. Okay, so just to kind of not labour the point, but the tone of voice that we have within the business is something, again, which has to be unifying. So I think the important part is sometimes we get lost. We think we should be changing the narrative and changing the story quite frequently, when in reality what we need to be doing, as per that wheel, as per the archetypes, is picking a theme and sticking with it. Because as we talk about it, we develop that tone of voice. One of the things that we talk about in our Essex Business Accelerator programs, and which are going to become a new sort of kind of pitching program for our businesses as well. What we talk about there is very much about building a lexicon of words that actually resonate really well with you, and that you have a clear understanding of what those words really mean to your audience. So when we use the word community, we have a clarity about what that community feels like and looks like. So it allows us to talk about community in a particular relevant way. If there's a sense of words that stick within your business, areas of the words that you put out there to create, if those words start to, if you like, create, the hairs on the back of your neck stand up because they mean something powerful to you. That's the bit that really helps you start to carve out that tone of voice. those words, the lexicons, the thing at the end of the day, we build a dictionary that we can lean into as we talk about our business. I don't know about you guys, but I mean, how many times have you listened to a business that talks about what it does and you think within the first second or two, I've got either no idea what it's talking about or I'm not really that interested. You've got to create that energy in your language to keep people connected to what you're doing. Because if you don't, what will happen is people will switch off and turn away. So it's that kind of process, that tone of voice. We lean into our language, lean into the lexicon, lean into that particular area to be able to deliver that. So one of the other areas that we focus around this, and again, when we talk about innovation within this, storytelling in the world of change, right? Storytelling and change are two fundamental things. We can tell the story about what is and what is happening today, and we want to tell the story about what is or what will be in the future. So those two areas of narrative, those two areas will open up and help us kind of shape a new sort of kind of piece of change within the business. And I think that the reason why it matters again for us is that as a leader in a business, as somebody that sits there, you are the embodiment of the business. It's your DNA, it's your stuff that's going into that space. It's your values, it's your language, it's the narrative, it's the whole kind of thing. This is when we start out within that. So we create that kind of area of, if you like, that influx of DNA into the way the business starts to develop and grow. So it doesn't matter whether we're leading a business of 2 or 1 or 25,000 people, we still have to understand what that embodiment of the business really means to us and how we talk about it and how we create that moment, if you like, for change and for opportunity. Our language can be welcoming. The stories that we tell can be open. They can be conversive. They can be dialogues. They can be people can feel invested in the story so that they can feel be a part of that particular process. So again, when you talk to people and you start, saying, well, what do you feel like you could offer us within the business? Where do you feel that you will get the most out of what we're offering in that particular space? And again, when we're in that world of that, it's a giving world. It's a transformative world within that particular area. So that helps us establish the groundworks and the rules around change and around the way that we want to go within that particular area. So businesses are moving, dynamic, and we have a relationship with them, and the business narrative will grow over a period of time. The entrepreneurial journey, where we're starting out, we tend to be the business, the back is the business, and that tends to be the dominating factor, and we sit within it, but we are embryonic within that particular stage. So it starts to grow, we grow within it, and we fill the space within the business. And then as we move forward into the world of growth, the business itself starts to move away potentially from where we are, and we become less significant within that role, up to the point whereby we get to a particular area where the business is now growing at a particular phase, and we are ultimately in that area where we're connected, but we're also extricated from that particular process. So there's a sort of kind of journey that goes with it. And like I said to you, I think the most important thing here to remember is that that journey is the foundation of the changing narrative within the business. And each stage of that journey will create data and insights along the way. And you will be able to actually start to create new ideas from that information, use it for the foundations of where the business needs to be going. And ultimately, it becomes a process of development and growth. Looks linear there. I can promise you it's not linear. It often means going forward and coming backwards, because the reality is that not everybody gets out of the starting out phase. It's not even to the starting up phase before we even end up in the growth. What we want to do in the Weave is very much help people get to that stage 3, get them through to that starting up bit, get them to understand where the resources are within the business, build that narrative, help them understand that narrative, demonstrate and shine a spotlight on them so that they can grow and they can start feeling, if you like, the business has more of a life of its own, and it becomes less daunting a task to get out of bed in the morning and come into work and do all of that. But we have to practice that. We have to figure out how that works, and we have to, if you like, lean into that narrative and capture that process. We can live this stage, But unless we capture it, we're going to come a cropper. It's not going to become relevant. We need to actually set the systems up to be able to do that, to actually understand the narrative and how we can capture it on a regular basis. So in this particular space here, what we're looking at from that point of view is this: what are we and what you repeatedly do, therefore we must do what we must repeatedly, right? In other words, we have to practice this whole kind of process. We have to push ourselves out there. We have to give ourselves that opportunity to develop that kind of whole area of repetition and growth within the business, and tell that story that allows us there. There is a kind of two areas of development that we focus on within that. Sorry, I didn't mean to do that. The first is the kind of personal mastery, developing ourselves within that framework. What can we do better? You know, what happens in our lives that will make a positive difference to our life? What habit can we change within that particular space? And what can we do? Habit can we bring into our business that can make a positive difference to our business? These are questions which really help us start to think about the business development, the narrative, the story, the changing dynamics of what we're about. You know, all of this kind of imagery, and at the end of the day, is something which really matters. And again, from the point of view of creating that kind of outcomes, cause and effect of change. So this is a kind of a tool that we use again, where we start thinking about new habits, the likely effects on whom, the impact on them. It starts to articulate a story, a new dialogue within that particular area. These are personal habits, these are business habits. What can we do within those two areas? How can it create some form of change and dynamic within that? The only thing that stands in our way is often us, our own resistance to change, the own way. But we've also got to recognize that you know, there are plenty of barriers out there in this particular journey, but stopping ourselves is one of them. Overcoming that particular challenge is in itself an important process. This is a really interesting thing. I'm not going to dwell on it too long, but I found this through a piece of facilitated work that I did. It's by a guy called Matthew Dix. It's Homework for Life. And every day, what he does is he captures something. He reflects on a piece of activity during the course of a day, and he just writes down a sentence, and he keeps those sentences going throughout that kind of whole period. And why he does that? Because he looks back on those particular sentences and he uses them as a catalyst for stories. He uses them for a catalyst to create new areas of development and understanding within his life. You can do the same within your business. You can think about those areas of development within the business, and allows you to get to that particular point. So the power of data when it's humanized, ultimately what we're saying there is that really what we need to do is humanize the numbers, humanize the outputs of what our business, and really understand it from a customer perspective, which is really important again. So all putting our customer from that point. A lot of this Matt's going to cover anyway, so I'm not going to dwell on it, but data comes from lots of these different areas: customer feedback, testimonials, all of that kind of stuff. Anything that we can do where there is a touch point means within the business there is an opportunity to create insight and change the narrative, or develop the narrative of the business. Understanding that puts in our mindset is really, really important in that regard. But that's always the job, is always on what the customer is trying to accomplish, making sure that we put ourselves in that particular space. If we don't recognize what the customer is trying to accomplish, we're going to forever be in the situation of trying to create stories that don't go anywhere or that don't have any real impact in that. And so that's your point. What's your story? What's your customer's story? That's the bit that really matters in that world. Okay, one of the things you can do from that point, build case studies are really powerful tools to communicate the narrative of the business, the impact that you're creating. Get them out there. They work in two ways. They inform, they educate, but they also help us shape the whole kind of process within that. It's a key to innovation and growth, is to have these kind of conversations, these capturing of this information and what we're trying to do. And if at the end of the day we're in that situation where we identify all of these things, that's where the leverage within the business really does manifestly come. Just very quickly, we're going to run a program on this going forward in more detail, but it's about visualization of data. Every time we bring stories to life, what we tend to do is overcomplicate it through visualization. So Excel is your friend. Make sure that you're aware of what that is. We're going to do a program going forward a little bit more on Excel and maybe a little bit more about charts and manifesting. Why do you need to use them? Well, because they color the language, they color the data, they color the story. They don't sit there in isolation. They are part of that area. Keeping things simple, right? Making sure that everybody is there. I'm not a great fan of pie charts particularly, but they serve a purpose. They kind of create a visualization. They imply that there is a whole, but there is a percentage of at the end of the day. But as soon as something gets converted into 3D, it becomes messy, confusing, and all the rest. So again, we're going to look at how we can best visualize that data and make it really appealing and clear. Telling a story is really important. Giving the narrative and the chart, the data, the information, making it relevant and giving some background and insight is a really important part. Right, I'm going to stop talking now. I'm going to hand over to Matt, and he can take you through that area. Matt, do you want to take control of the slides, or do you want me to just carry on pushing the button?
If you can push the button, that would be great. Thank you.
No problem. I will do that. I will mute myself, but thank you very much.
Perfect. So I'm going to start by looking at a few different sources of data. I think for the first one, if we move to the next slide, is really the classic survey. So surveying your customer or an audience to unearth interesting insights. It's something that you might have seen on TV. It's something you might read in newspapers. It used to be a big part of family fortunes, our survey said, which I'm sure you've seen. But it's a great way of uncovering things like market trends, looking at the state of the nation in a particular industry. It might be accountancy, it could be construction, whatever industry you're working in. Comparisons are always really interesting. One of the classic ones is looking at differences between people in the north and the south, or different parts of the country, and pulling some conclusions from that. But I think it's also worth thinking about how you can use that data to make comparisons that might be interesting. So there's a really good example of that. If I said to you that 74% of kids aged 5 to 12 spend less than 60 minutes playing outdoors, you might think, okay, that's interesting, but quite forgettable. If I then told you that information in a slightly different way and said, 3/4 of kids spend more time indoors than prisoners, you'd suddenly think, we really do have a problem. Kids need to be spending more time outdoors. That's quite shocking. So I think making comparisons like that with the data that comes out of a survey is really the best way to make use of it and to tell those stories. There's a lot of different ways that you can carry out a survey. So you can use free tools like Google Forms. If you've got a mailing list for your business, if you've got even a Facebook page, you can ask people to take part in a survey. That can be a really good way of getting a few responses. It can be a good way of finding new things for your business as well. Or you can work with a partner. It could be a university. It could be a survey house on more of a sort of paid projects. The benefit of that tends to be the credibility, but also you can reach a larger number of people than maybe what you'd be able to through your own personal network. I've used surveys a lot for clients that I've worked with. One of the ones that springs to mind was with a online retail company. They created a technology that helps people to sell overseas. So following the news about Brexit, we surveyed retailers across the UK to understand how they were preparing for some of those changes, where they had concerns, where they saw opportunities, and where they might need some more help, which gave us lots of information that we could use in social media content, in content with the media, and in marketing, and creating a piece of thought leadership that could be used to drive leads to the business. If we move to the next slide, something we do a lot of as well is desk research or secondary research. It's a really good way of generating data without having to spend anything but time. You can look at how things are changing, any emerging trends. It can be useful if you're wanting to make a point but don't have data to back up an opinion. You can gather that data and showcase it or shine a light on an issue that's really important to you or to your business. There's a few ways I've done this in the past. One way I used this was to look at FTSE 100 companies. So we had a list of all the companies that were on the FTSE 100 and looked at what social media channels they were using, whether they were on Twitter, whether they were on Facebook, and where they're using those channels for customer service purposes, as while that sort of industry was starting to evolve and people were starting to interact with businesses in different ways. It was showing an example of that trend and something that businesses need to think about in terms of call centres and that sort of thing. Something we've done more recently was some work with Co-op, Co-op UK, the trade body for cooperatives in the country. We did some work ahead of COP26 in Glasgow, looking at how cooperatives were preparing for some of the net zero targets that the UK has. And really what this boiled down to was looking at a sample of, I think it was about 50, maybe 100 cooperative businesses, looking at their websites and seeing if they published anything on their website about how they were cutting carbon emissions, were they using solar energy, were they using LED lighting and anything like that to save energy, and have they got targets within the business that they're reporting on. Which gave us a wealth of data that we could use to show how co-ops were contributing to some of that climate action in the UK. That was used as part of marketing, but it was also used as part of political work as well to influence some of the sort of government stakeholders who are responsible for this area. If we move on a second, to looking at your own data. I think, as James mentioned, there's lots of data that is created by businesses, whether it's from customer touch points or it's from your own technology that you use. Often there can be some quite interesting insights that you can then glean from that data that might be a great way to tell a story or a great way to showcase insights to your potential customers. So it could be looking at market trends, it could be looking at how you can use some of that data as an economic indicator, or it could be looking at how consumer behaviour is changing, and then giving you an opportunity to talk about what that means and how your customers might need to maybe act in a different way as a result. You've probably seen this in the news. I think every month, Rightmove, the sort of online property website, they release some of the data that they have in their systems. They have the average price that properties are listed at across the UK, hotspots where properties are selling fastest. They have data like the average time it takes to actually sell a property in the UK. So there's lots and lots of data that they have and they publish. And the media sort of lap that up, they write about it all the time, but it's also something that they use in a lot of their own marketing in their social media content. It's really interesting content that they essentially are able to produce for nothing. To give a couple of examples of where I've done this before, I worked with AdMob. It's sort of Google's mobile advertising business. And every month we used to share data about which mobile devices were accessing adverts, and it was a really insightful way of looking at how the devices that people are using in the UK and around the world were changing over time. So we could see the rise of the iPhone, we could start to see Samsung devices becoming more popular, and it sort of gave us something to talk about. Another good example is I worked with Eventbrite. If you've ever come across them, the ticketing website for events, they have a wealth of data into what sort of events people are hosting across the UK. And by looking at that data, we were able to see that there was a real increase in the number of events centering around gin tastings and that sort of thing. So we were able to look at the fastest growing event types. And then put a spotlight on some of the different gin events that were taking place across the UK to really tell that story to the public. Another way you can produce data if we look at the next slide, is to use freedom of information requests. I'm not sure if you've ever come across these before, but this is something that anyone in the UK has the right to do. So you can go to any public body and ask them questions, and they legally have to get back to you within 20 working days. So it could be the local police station, it could be the government, it could be the NHS, any public body you can contact, and they'll have to get back to you and provide answers to your questions. There are some exceptions to this. If you ask for too much information, they may only answer some of your questions, but you can send as many requests as you like. So it can often be a good idea to ask one question at a time. And there's a few other exceptions as well. There's some data, obviously, they won't release to the public. A really great website to look at is whatdotheyknow.com. This gives you access to all the different contact details you'll need to contact different public bodies across the UK, and there's some tips and some templates you can use so you can ask for questions in the right way. It's something I've used for different clients in the past, and one of the examples I wanted to talk about was focused around intelligent CCTV cameras. I worked with a business that created cameras that could recognize number plates, and we were trying to think, how can we tell a story around the benefits that technology can provide? And what we sort of realized is that technology would be really great for spotting people that fill up their car at the petrol station and drive off without paying. So we were able to do a freedom of information request to the police, and we were able to get data on how many incidents like that had happened across the UK. So we could look at, the number, had that increased year on year. We could look at where those incidents were happening and where the particular hotspots in certain counties or different parts of the UK, and we could then use that to estimate the kind of money that might be lost by petrol stations as a result of that, as a way of really showing the benefit of the technology, and also looking at the size of the problem and how that's changing. If we move on again, another great free source of data is the census, and I've got the link here at the bottom for you. You might remember a few years ago we were all asked to fill out a huge document. I think there were dozens and dozens of questions, everything from name and date of birth, how many people live in your family, religion, all sorts of different questions. All of that data is now available to the public. You can go in, you can search through all of it. It's incredibly interesting. You can even look at the street where you live and find out some interesting insights there. Things like average salary in the area you live, how many people work from home. There's lots and lots of data there which can give you good insights into maybe your customer base. If you've got a business in Chelmsford, you could get a sense of what sorts of disposable income people might have. You can use it as a reference for market trends. So the example I've got here is one of the questions was about how people heat their homes. So if you're in a business doing renewable central heating, you could look at different areas around Essex and see which areas where there might be a bigger opportunity for you to sell that sort of technology to homeowners. You can also make comparisons between areas. So you could look at which areas are adopting faster to some of that sort of climate-focused technology than others. It's something we've used recently for a project with the fire service. This was sort of new to me, but the fire service have something called on-call firefighters. These are essentially people who don't work full-time for the fire service. They have other jobs elsewhere, but they provide support as it's needed. And the thing is that they must live within 5 minutes of the fire service. So if that bell rings, they've got to be there and they've got to go and help and support. And by looking at these maps, we were able to get lots of information into who lives within that 5-minute radius from each of the different fire stations we were looking at, which then helped to inform a recruitment campaign that we were we were working on to get more people to sign up for that sort of role. If we move to the next slide, another free source of data that's incredibly useful is Google Trends. You can see different trends in what people are searching for at any time, and it's a really great way, I think, of understanding what is getting people's attention at any moment. And it can give you lots of data that you can then use in your own content and in your on your sort of social media pages as well. A really good example here is obviously there was the news recently about Kate Middleton suffering with cancer. In the next few days, there was 373% increase in searches for cancer screenings. All that data has come from Google Trends. I think, as you can see, the example here, obviously there was the incident in the US with the Baltimore Bridge, and there's a huge increase in searches for that story. It can be a good way of also looking at what content people might be interested in. If you're regularly creating content on maybe your TikTok or on your social media, you can look at what people are searching for related to your business or the sort of products and services that you offer. It may be that there's particular questions that people are commonly asking or starting to ask more often, and then answering some of those questions in your content could be a good way of sort of getting in front of potential customers. If we move on again, this is a bit more techy, but I wanted to include it anyway. Data scraping is a really great way of essentially automating desk research. You can gather lots of data very quickly from websites, from social media, and from any APIs that have been published by public bodies. So these are essentially streams of data that the government puts out that anyone can use. An example of this would be Companies House, where you sort of register your business. You can pull information from that as to how many new businesses have been registered in the last 6 months, what kind of business, what sector do they work in, what are their names. It's something that a lot of businesses use that data anyway to target new business owners with products and services and promotions. You often get some letters through the post, or at least I do. And that's where a lot of it comes from. You can use it to look at market trends, how are things changing. Something you can also do is look at price fluctuations. So you can gather data very quickly from competitor websites and look at that on a sort of regular basis to see how has the price of, I don't know, tennis rackets changed over the last 6 months. And they can give you some good data that you can then use in your content, through to things like job listings. What kind of jobs are people hiring for? How many jobs? How is that changing in relation to the economy? And I think really making those sort of comparisons can be really useful. There's a great website called Octopass. It does have a free version of the tool that you can use for scraping data. There's lots of templates. You don't have to do any coding or anything like that. So it's definitely worth having a play with that. And I think it might give you some ideas of how you could potentially use it. And then if we move on again, I wanted to give a few ideas about, sorry, I'll go back a second. I wanted to show a few creative examples to give you some inspiration. But before I go into that, sorry, if we go to the next slide. I talked a lot about sources for data. These are a few creative ways you can actually present that data. So one is infographics, so combining charts, text, data to tell a story more visually. So it could be taking a data point and then looking at how you can visually express that through it could be pictures of people, it could be anything that helps to tell that story. Maps are always useful if you're looking at making sort of comparisons across different parts of the county or the country. You can show that quite nicely on a map, a sort of illustrated map. Animated videos are great as well as a way of um, sharing and talking about data in a way that is visually interesting and can sort of help you to show trends over time. One of the sort of great examples, I don't know if you've seen it, is there's lots of videos like this on YouTube, where if you search for the tallest building in the world, you can see a history of how that has changed over the years. There's other great ones around. The most popular musician in the UK or in the US, and you can see that over year by year, which are the 10 most top selling artists, and it can be a really great way of just of seeing how those trends change. Data journalism. Essentially, this is using data in articles, in any blog posts, any content that you're creating. It can even be if you're producing a report or a white paper or something like that for your business and packaging it up in a more long form way. There's loads and loads of opportunity to use data in that way to add a bit of credibility and to provide some interesting insights for your customers. Social media, I think I've mentioned a few times about how you can use data in your tweets or in your posts. Sharing, I think maybe one data point at a time is a great way to do that, just so it's not too overwhelming, and it's a great way to really highlight particular insights that might be of interest. And then something else, thinking more visually, is how can you turn a data point into a piece of art? This is really only limited by your imagination. There's countless different ways that you could do that. Just having a think about how you can actually present data in a really visually interesting, attention-grabbing way. I've got a couple of examples like that that I'll speak about in a moment. I love this campaign. So this is for Show Racism and the Red Card. They do lots of work to combat racism in football in the UK, and something that they did a couple of years ago was to actually do a DNA test for all of the people on the England football team. And what they've done is produce a football shirt where every percentage of that shirt takes up a certain percentage of the team's DNA. So you can see here there's a large number of people who have links to Ireland or to Jamaica or to Nigeria as a way of just showing that we're obviously very connected, and a way of sort of opening a conversation about what it means to be English or to be part of the football team. If we move on a second, this is another, I think, sort of stunning image. Every week, 84 men commit suicide in the UK, and the campaign against living miserably wanted to sort of find a way of putting that in public's eye, bringing it to attention. And the way they did that was to actually partner with ITV. So they've got 84 statues of men, put them on the top of the rooftops of ITV as a way of really making people think about the vast number of men that are unhappy and do sadly commit suicides on a weekly basis. So I think this is a way of just having one statistic and being able to tell a story really, really clearly in quite a stark way. If we move on, there's another campaign that I really like. So this was actually done by Hemnet. They're essentially the Swedish Rightmove. They have loads and loads of data, as you'd expect, of what people are searching for when they're looking to buy a property in Sweden. So they use that data to create House of Clicks. So this is based on all of their own data, as to what Swedish people are searching for when they look for a new house. So this essentially is the ideal Swedish property based on all of those searches. And the way they sort of presented this as being a house that was built by 20 million people. So I think it's a really fascinating way of thinking differently about the data that you have and how you can turn that into a visual story or a piece of art. Um, Another example, if we move on, is from Stella Artois, the beer. Um, they have been around since 1366. They've been around for a very, very long time. And something they did a couple of years ago was to actually analyze paintings. So they looked at fine art produced across Europe over the last few centuries, and they were able to calculate the probability that the beer being drank in those paintings was Stella Artois. So they were able to do that based on the time when the painting was painted, where it was painted. Was that somewhere that they were selling Stella Artois at that time? But also the glass that someone was drinking from or the bottle they were drinking from, did that match with the sort of bottles that they were selling or the glasses that they were serving beer in at that time? And they're able to calculate in each painting the percentage, likely the sort of probability that that beer was Stella Artois, which I just think is amazing. Obviously, I think Stella Artois have a huge marketing budget and they're able to do something like this. But I think it just gives you a really good sort of inspiration of the kind of things that you could do for your business with data and a really interesting way of telling a story using that data. If we move on again, this is an Instagram account that I would really recommend following. It's called Charter Daily. Every day they share a new visualization of data. For someone like me that loves data, it's probably one of my favorite accounts. Maybe it's a little bit geeky, but it's interesting how they present that data. And I think going back to what James was saying earlier about different bar charts and different visualizations, it can really give you some good ideas for how you can take data and present it in a really compelling and engaging way. You can spend hours looking at some of this data. It's across all kinds of different areas. And then if we move on again, I just had a few final thoughts just to end the session really. So I think one is just think visually, it's very, very easy to take data and to sort of play that back in articles and in content. But if there's a way that you can take that data and present it in a visual way as a story, I think it's a really much more compelling than just text. I think I mentioned a couple of times about being able to make comparisons, and the example I gave was about um, kids spending more time indoors than prisoners. I think those sorts of comparisons are a really great way of making data engaging. Data can be a little bit overwhelming, especially if you just shove loads and loads of data points at people. So I think it's really worth thinking about how you can make it easy to digest, maybe focusing on one thing at a time, or thinking about how you word it or phrase it so it's much easier to consume. And I wouldn't just present lots and lots of data and charts and things like that because people sort of glaze over and switch off. It's more using it selectively as an aid to present a story or to add some credibility to what you're saying. And then I think the final thing is just check everything twice. I think it's really, really important when you're presenting data that data must be accurate. If you're taking it from somewhere else, you need to make sure that it's sourced appropriately. You just don't want to be called out if you're presenting data and actually that data is wrong. So just double check everything twice would be my recommendation there. And yeah, thank you for listening. If you scan the QR code, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to stay in touch with any of you if you have any more questions or if this is something that you're thinking about and we can help with, then very happy to have a conversation about data storytelling.
Well, thank you very much indeed. That's absolutely great. Thank you, everybody. Just run over a little bit in time, but it's still just about the past. So thank you very much indeed for doing that. So just check out the Weave community. There's a link down there if you want to join the community and be a part of it. In that particular area, we've got lots of other social parts of that as well. We are delivering a lot more in terms of that, and ultimately we're going to be delivering a lot more of these kind of workshops and webinars over the next years. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Much appreciate, Matt. Thank you again for your contribution. Really, really interesting and much appreciated. I will share the slides and everything within the community and the video as well. So have a great week, Easter, and really thank you very much indeed for turning up.
Thanks, James.
Everybody.
Bye.
Bye.